I can buy TV ads for like $5 CPM with a really high quality audience. Pessimists are often right, but optimists are often rich. That became the best-selling digital marketing course of all time on udemy.com, and it has now been taken more than 325,000 times.
So Patrick, 10 years ago, Google started rolling out automations and you refused to adopt AI. You were skeptical and said it was just bad for agencies until you had an accident with a client. This client had no idea what they were doing and they just turned on AI without noticing it. But then when you looked, you realized the AI actually did better than they thought. And so now you're a super fan. You even wrote a book on it called Join or Die, which became an Amazon bestseller. Google even flew you to Ireland, the UK, and Dubai to be a keynote speaker on automation. And today you run an AI-powered ad agency called Adventure Media. You've got 30 people and you've worked with over 500 clients like American Eagle, Sports Illustrated, and NASDAQ. That's a lot. And so, Patrick, let's go back to when you guys first started building this out. Tell me about how you structured it once you realized it was like, oh shoot, this is a real business.
So when you go back in time to 2015, we were a really small company. There was 4 of us, and we called ourselves an agency, but we were glorified freelancers, mostly doing Google ads and Facebook ads and a little bit of LinkedIn and some other stuff at the time. But Google was definitely the platform we were investing in the most. And there was a big narrative at the time that Google's automated tools, or what have since been all rebranded as like the AI tools, were all bad. And that propaganda, that message was something that agencies in particular really subscribed to. Like without directly admitting it, but it was like, this looks like this is coming for our jobs. And again, this is like 10 years ago, right? This is 2015, 2016, where it's like, oh, the automated tools are going to come for our jobs. It's going to replace what we do. And so there was a natural defense against it and saying these must be bad. And you would test it in some small way and you would be unhappy with the results. And it would run away and it'll probably spend too much of your money and the results weren't as good as your previous campaigns. So you'd be proud to say, ha, I beat the robot, right? I'm better than Google's automated bidding. And so we sort of pounded our chests on that. And we all sort of believed in the industry that AI was bad. And then, as you mentioned, I had one kind of accidental experience where we had just started working with this new client, and right before hiring us, they were managing the work internally. Someone in the team had opted into a bidding strategy called maximize conversions on 2 of the campaigns inside their search campaigns. And that campaign started to outperform the others. And as I dug through the data when we started working with this client, I didn't understand how or why it was happening. And there was a lot of like kind of non-traditional stuff that was happening with the way the search terms were getting matched with the keywords and all these other things that were happening there. It was unlike anything I had seen before in managing Google Ads campaigns up until that point. And so I was like, this is really interesting. Like maybe there's something about this AI thing that's actually working. And I brought it to a couple colleagues and they were like, oh, I've kind of seen that. It kind of makes sense. We started just having this outward conversation more and more about like, maybe there's something to this whole AI stuff. And eventually realized like, oh, this is actually really powerful. It really makes sense why Google is leaning into this. Why don't we position ourselves as the pro AI agency when everyone in the world hates it? And what I eventually realized was like, all those experiments we had failed because we wanted them to fail, because we didn't know how AI worked. We didn't know how to set ourselves up for success. And so once we like leaned into the technology and like really embraced it with open arms, we were able to completely change the way that we were driving performance in our campaigns using these AI tools. So this was like 2017, 2018, we became one of the first agencies that was like proactively leaning into these tools and then developing training content around it. And that was probably one of the best decisions that we made running the agency, because that bet certainly worked out in the long run. But yeah, it was sort of this like accidental experiment that I uncovered and was like, oh, maybe I've been wrong this whole time. And it was a very, very humbling moment that turned out to be all for the best.
And so you guys, so you double down on automation, AI, well, more automation at the time. I don't know, AI too. And you guys started to take off. And I think you mentioned earlier that you were freaking out at how quickly you were taking off. And so you started adding a ton of structure. and kind of overstructured a little bit. Tell us about that whole kind of pendulum.
Yeah, so we went through pretty rapid growth between 2017 and let's call it 2022, right? Every single year we doubled in size and revenue. And a lot of things were working in our favor, including Gus leaning into AI. I published a book, you mentioned Join or Die, published that in 2020. That really helped our credibility and our recognition. And we suddenly became very attractive to a lot of brands that were interested in where the puck was going. And so we built out the team. We opened 2 more offices. We opened an office in Philadelphia and in Florida. Our main headquarters, if you want to call it that, is in New York. And we dramatically scaled up the team, and it became a little bit difficult to manage all the different moving parts, right? Like when you go from a company of 4 to 10 people ish to all of a sudden having 30 to 40 employees, many of which who like you don't really have a close personal relationship with, and some of them you've only been in person with once or twice. It's really hard to sort of replicate a lot of the magic that you had when you were a much smaller startup. And so what I had been working on over that time was putting in more structure and process to be able to help the company scale. I'm sure a lot of your listeners recognize this, like a smaller company, it's just constant chaos. You're running around with your hair on fire, you're putting out fires. Like it's just, everyone has a million different jobs, right? The owner of the company is also the one like fixing the plumbing in the bathroom when like everything goes down, right? So like that's just kind of what happens. But then as we started to grow, it was like, okay, we need to be more intentional about this. We need to have more structure, more process, how we're going to do it. And I actually think that, the pendulum swings both ways. I think we probably overcorrected a little bit. We probably put in a little bit too much put in a little bit too much structure and processes, and became like a little bloated in terms of like the way we were trying to operate things. And then over time, like kind of swung the pendulum back in the other direction. And now a couple of years have gone by where I've sort of just come to the like realization that we're a better company when there's like a good amount of chaos in our company, right? Like even though we've been around for more than a decade, and even though we still have a lot of employees, it's sort of like you come here and you sign up for this, and things are going to be a little bit chaotic, and you have to take on you have to wear a bunch of different hats all the time. It's going to be a little bit unpredictable, and that's sort of what you're signing up for, and that's kind of what makes us who we are. And so kind of recognizing that we're not all of a sudden going to be this company with like totally rigid structures around us was actually very relieving, because it allowed me to stop worrying about like this thing that I thought we were supposed to become, and realize we're actually better in our earlier version of ourselves.
And so what was like, give me an example, like what was some of the structure that you removed, and like what was the pain that caused you to remove that structure?
We would have like meetings and reporting cadences and check-ins and just a lot of like bloat that you would get from like a larger company. There was just like a lot of processes. Like here's the way you have to follow. And I was spending a lot of my time building these processes and developing these frameworks and like trying to pressure test it, and like feeling really proud of like, what looks really good on a mural board and what looks really good in an organizational chart. That's actually like, I really tried like a lot of times building organizational charts and being like, okay, this is what we're going to build toward. And we're going to move people into these roles, and we're going to hire for that role. And then realizing like, oh, it was never really the right time and place to really get that off the ground. And then so at one point it was like, stop trying to chase this like clearly defined organizational chart. Like stop it. You're never going to get there. And your company will probably be worse off if you do that. Just like give everyone pretty clear direction about what is expected of them, give them some guardrails in place as far as like how to operate as a team, and then just like let the rest be fine. Like just trust that you have good people that can do their jobs, and don't worry so much about like idiot proofing the entire business. And like sort of embracing that, it reduced a lot of our meetings, it reduced a lot of our headache, it reduced a lot of confusion, and allowed and empowered people to go out and sort of do like chart their own path in the company.
And like, okay, that's fascinating. Let's use that example. So can you say like what size you were before you started adding structure, and it sounds like you added structure too early, and then you grew to a certain size and was like, hey, we need to remove some of that structure because I'm in too many meetings, I'm taking too long, that kind of stuff. and now you're at the point where it sounds like you want to add some structure back. Is that kind of walk me through that timeline a little bit?
So I think like most businesses have always had this problem where it's like, do you build first and then wait for the revenue to come, or do you like get the revenue and then you try and build backwards, right? And it's sort of like this very, very difficult problem that you have as a um, when you're anticipating scale, when you're trying to scale. And we had always done one or the other, right? It was always like kind of depended on kind of what day of the week it was. And now I think AI technology changes that dynamic where you can build the infrastructure that can prepare you for scale without having to overhire at your company first. And that's a really different like scenario than what we had experienced 6 years ago, where I was like, okay, like we just signed, so as we got toward the end of 2021, we had signed three of the largest clients. Like each of them individually were larger than any client that we had signed at all in our history. And these clients were collectively made up 40% of our revenue throughout 2022. So there was like a ton of work that went into this. And so we had to quickly hire and staff up accounts, and a lot of people that like didn't really know the company processes or the culture or the protocol or how we operated things, whatever. And we just kind of had to like go into it. And so, you talk to any tech founder, they'll tell you like you sort of overbloat your company so that you're ready to deal with the shock of a massive increase in revenue or customers or whatever it is. And then you sort of adjust and adapt over time. Now, I don't think you need to do that as much as you used to because so much of the manpower can be built into AI systems. And that's sort of like now that we've kind of gone through this cycle and we've contracted a bit after that point, and now we're kind of building again. We've learned a lot through that experience where it's like, okay, we don't need to make some of the mistakes that we made last time, where we added too much bloat and like oversight and all that other stuff. We don't need like tiers of management in the way that we once thought. We can now kind of build this architecture in a different way thanks to the AI technology that can be underneath all of it.
Yeah, because it's a completely different world now. And so when I think about the yeah, okay. Um, so when I think about like um, a system, right, which is what we plug into businesses, an operating system, we called it. A system is made up of three parts. It's people, processes, and tech. Um, and what we would do is we would first design the process, which is how work flows through the business, right? You have your acquisition engine, you have your delivery engine. Um, and then we figure out like for each node of activity or for each step of the process, is it a person or is it tech that plugs into it? And I think what I'm hearing now is back then, that took a long time. The tech took a long time to build. The people take a long time to hire or adapt. Today, the tech side of that node is very quick from both a cost and a time perspective. And so we can put in a little more structure today than we were able to back then. Is that roughly true?
It is. And also, I'm not sure like if this is normal or if your like listeners would agree with this, but like we were always like anti-tech, pro AI, but anti-tech, because to me, like most SaaS products or software that we would have as a small business was like never really a good investment. Like aside from like using HubSpot as our CRM and the proposal software that we used and like a few other things, like everything else was always very too expensive, and all these companies required an annual commitment and a bunch of money up front. And like as a small business, it was like none of this is ever worth it. And so we were always like bootstrapping everything and saying like, okay, like we don't need that measurement system. We don't need this, whatever. Like we're just gonna like figure it out and make it up ourselves. So we were like overly reliant on people. And now you don't really need to go out and buy that tech because you could just build it yourself. So it's like it's allowing us to do the things that we were never really able to do because we just had like a principle against it, because we knew like you get a great demo on some piece of software that's going to like make your life a lot easier, but it's like not going to work. You're going to regret it. And now it's like, okay, we could just build a version of that that's like 80% as good and it's free. And we can build it to spec the way that we want to run it. And now, like, that's really only been over the last year or so, but it's completely changed the way we operate the business.
How would you, so if you're looking back at it again, right, and you're talking about the bloat, because if you put a meeting cadence in place, you put rules in place, all that kind of stuff, that's still a time cost, right? Not a whatever, and a paid cost, but like a time cost, which is expensive. It's very expensive. Um, would you opt for more structure today than you would have back in the day? And what does structure mean to you, by the way?
Yeah, we're throwing this word around a lot. I think it's really clearly defined rules about what people do every day and how you should operate, where there's no surprises. And I think that's kind of like still a pretty vague definition, but I think that what we were trying to implement was, we would sign clients that were all shapes and sizes and for all different industries. And so for a long time, every new client was a wild card. And that would be a lot of anxiety for our team because like you never really knew what you were getting yourself into when you were assigned to a new project. And so my goal by adding structure was reducing that anxiety, saying like how can we optimize for the common denominator here? Um, the place where we did it the best that actually still matters is onboarding.
Mm.
And so we've really systematized our client onboarding. And that's something like I'm really proud of, really happy with how it's come. But then we started to like try and put in this like cadence for how we communicate with clients and how often we communicated with them and what the structure of a meeting should be like and what the reporting should look like and who should be involved at certain pieces along the way. And then like eventually realized like, hey, maybe like every client can be a little bit different and that's okay. And maybe you should allow your team to deal with that uncertainty. And even if it is a little uncomfortable, like whatever, they're adults, they'll figure it out. I think like my need to like put in structure was very much trying to like protect and coddle like a lot of people that I've since sort of come away from that and said like you hire good people, you put a lot of trust in them, let them go and figure it out. Allow them to deal with uncertainty in their day to day a little bit. And that's where you don't need to like manipulate every like little detail about how they operate.
Yeah, okay. I think we're saying the same thing. And I'll just like define my terms for a sec. Because I think a system is three things: is people, process, and tech. I mentioned that. But then each one of those subdivides, right? And so culture to me is the rules that people do each day. If you hit this event or if something happens, you react in this way. But that's like kind of company wide. Then you have individual rules for what people do, and that's roles and responsibilities, right? Um, and so the dealing with uncertainty, um, I think there's like kind of two sets of rules for folks. You have the SOPs or like the processes, and then everything that's not in the SOPs is culture or values. So between those two things, if you hire for someone who has the same values you do, and they can back up their decisions in uncertainty by saying, "Hey, I reacted this way because you hired me for these values. I have these values, and so that's how I react." Then having less rules on the SOP side, the structured side, works. But I think the trade-off is if you decide to remove structure or remove SOPs, as call it, then you have to over-index on culture and values, which is hard for a lot of people because that's like soft skills.
Really like that framing, and I've never thought of it that way. That you have your SOPs and everything else is culture. And I think that that's something that um now again, if I can go back in time, I don't know if we would have been able to do it differently because I think that like where technology was at the time, what the industry demanded in 2021 was very different than it was now. But I do think that now we're in a place where we can rely more on culture. And I know that that's probably like the business school answer would be no, make more SOPs. And I think that I made the mistake earlier in my career of going that route of like, oh, we like, and I'll tell you, we have hundreds of SOPs, and they're great. Like in there, and there's one person in our organization that like owns them and is super helpful and like is on, on Slack like parsing them out. But more SOPs is not the answer to growing a successful business. For us, at least, what I've found is like no, build slower with culture. Find the right people who have the right mentality, who have now this is an interesting like similar values but different skill sets maybe, right? Like you just have a bunch of people who operate the same way you do, then you're not diversified enough. But I think like if you're directionally aligned at like what you're heading toward, and then you have like a lot of diversity right underneath that, then you can still sort of operate within the same culture. And I think that that's sort of our new mentality. And like, the elephant in the room is like everything that we're embracing here with AI. And we've now centered ourselves around this concept of builder mentality, where it's you have to be willing and able to lean into this technology and be optimistic about it and be like really excited about how this could be a net positive for you and your career. And if you are not, then it's probably not going to work out here. And it's not because I want you to leave. It's because you need to be like really curious and excited if you're ever going to make this technology work for you. And so like the concept of like, we need to become builders and not just people who like execute SOPs. Because builders are people who are like trying to do something different and innovative and new and invent new solutions that we didn't really even think about yesterday. And so like right now we're sort of in a mindset where we're building more around culture than SOPs. And that is the opposite of what we were doing 5 years ago when we were building the business.
Yeah. And I think so you're saying, hey, less SOPs, more culture. And I think there's a trade-off there because if you want to move in that direction, there's a lot of the business you have to fundamentally change to make that happen, right? Like change management. That's a big deal because if you're saying, okay, you're going to be more builders, like how do you make sure that actually ripples through your organization? So change management's a big one. Values is hard. It's hard to hire for and instill because values tend to be higher level traits, like in your case, be innovative, right? And you can only really pick a few, but then you need to make sure you hire for them and that the people continue to embrace values, which is fluffy. It's hard to take fluffy concepts and make sure they filter through an organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think our core values have always kind of remained the same. Our founder, Isaac Verdansky, he kind of ironed out our core values a couple of years ago. I'm probably going to forget one of them, but idiotic optimism was the first one, which is sort of this mentality that like, I don't know how I got here, but I think I can win. That's sort of idiotic optimism. Positive energy, curiosity, intellectual honesty, and sense of humor. Right, like those are all still like fundamental, and I think we've always tried to hire for that. And again, like we even though I say like we've had bloat in our organization, like we've still always been like a pretty lean team, and we've always been really selective at our hiring process. And I was actually a couple of years ago we like really innovated the way we hired, and it's a pretty rigorous process. So like even though like I would look at it saying bloat, like I think we're still pretty lean and aligned more so than a lot of other organizations. But that's separate. Now, on the culture side, and as far as like getting people aligned on that, I obviously spend a lot of time thinking about this. It's probably the most important thing that I do. And especially as we are moving very quickly and trying to transform our agency, it's very important to create a safe space where people can feel comfortable and protected and not that they're going to be falling behind, and also that they're not going to be replaced by the AI we're telling them to embrace, right? It's a very, very like it's an elephant in the room. And so I've learned a lot of this like mentality of like how do you allow people the freedom to ask stupid questions, and how do you make people not feel intimidated by the fact that like they know someone in the organization is so much better than them at XYZ thing. And I think being very intentional about breaking down those barriers and creating that safe space is like probably one of the most important things that you can do as a leader. But I'll give you a really specific example. earlier, or I guess in 2025, we were getting more and more into vibe coding, and we wanted the entire organization to start to experiment with it. It was something that only a couple of us were doing, and we're like, we need everyone to get involved here. And so came up with this idea to do a hackathon. And it was separate from all the work that we were doing. And it was like, okay, here's a tool called Replit. We're going to get everyone an account. You have to build a project. It could be about anything. Doesn't have to be related to work. There were a few very loose guardrails in place where it needed to have a few different API connections. Like there were some very, very vague things here that we set in place. And we were going to give you 2 weeks to do it. And then we were going to have a day where we all kind of shared our projects. We voted on what our favorite ones were, and there'd be a cash prize at the end. We'd have, we'd order pizza, have a couple of drinks, whatever it was. And now this is where we screwed up. We said at the time, this is the kind of thing that will probably only take you an hour or two to figure out. Like you could probably, like Replit is such an amazing tool. And by the way, if anyone's not familiar, Replit's a vibe coding tool, a cloud-based tool, and whatever, you can do a lot of really cool stuff with it. And theoretically, like if you kind of know what you're doing, like, yeah, you could definitely build a workable like web app in an hour, 2 hours, whatever. It's awesome. Now we said that, and the reason we went low on the time commitment is because we didn't want people to think it was a massive commitment. We wanted people to be like, all right, I'll spend an hour or two screwing around with Replit and see if I can like enter this contest. And we made a mistake by doing that because realistically, it was going to take everyone 10 to 20 hours at least. And so now when you're in hour 5 or 7 or 8, trying to like figure out like what an API key is, you all of a sudden get very insecure because your boss just told you this whole thing should take 2 hours max. And now you're on hour 8 and you feel like you haven't even gotten started yet. You now feel like an idiot. When in reality, I knew it was going to take that long. My own project took 20 hours and the final product of it sucked. And so I had this conversation only last week with an employee who like is now like she's doing an amazing work with all these different tools. But she was like, back when we did that like Replit challenge, 8 months ago, I like really thought I was going to fail. And I thought that I wasn't gonna be able to keep up with you guys because you made it seem as if it should only take 20 minutes to get up and running. And I realized like by doing that unintentionally, I created a negative culture around how long it should take you to adapt these skills or develop these skills. And so like these are the kinds of things now that like you need to be really, really careful about and how you're sending directives to the team if you are trying to build around culture. And it's like, it sounds like it's really, really nuanced stuff, but like it really, really matters. So that's kind of the direction. And I'm still really learning a lot about what all that looks like.
So there's two directions I want to take this in, and I'll let you choose your own adventure.
Sure.
Okay, so one is you guys have very unique values. Like most people, 90% of people I talk to, I ask them for their values. They say speed, be smart, right? Like things like that, right? You say idiotic optimism, right? And so that level of value has two traits to it. One is it's wildly unique, meaning you're gonna hook in a unique type of person who's a great fit for you guys. And the other one is very strategic. And just to define strategic, I mean, that's something where the opposite of that is not stupid, right? So as an example, idiotic optimism, I guess you could say idiotic pessimism, that would be stupid, but it's strategic because you could say non-idiotic optimism or smart optimism, and that's still a great choice. But you guys took a choice and said, hey, I want idiotic optimism, which brings a certain type of person. And so that's one thing there where I would love to hear about like why you guys chose that, and if you think that level of specificity is what makes you guys able to lean on values as opposed to SOPs. And the other direction that you could take this in is change management, right? Like you want your business to focus on your business to be AI friendly. And it's hard to get people to really be like, yes, I'm all in. Change is great. This is a new thing. I want to totally change how I work and like get into AI. That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. What are you more passionate about? Which direction you want to go in?
I'll give you a quick point on the first, around core values. So optimism. I mean, look, all this came from our founder, Isaac Verdansky. He is the quintessential idiotic optimist. And so, like, when we look backwards at what led to our success, it came down to, like, people say, like, oh, it's luck. It's like, well, you also worked really hard. You made a couple really good bets, right? It's not luck. Like, a little bit of luck helps. But like our earliest success as a business came from Isaac developing a 27-hour Google AdWords course in 2015, that he like slaved away at it. He converted his 1-bedroom apartment into a production studio, slept an hour and a half every single day. It was like right after he hired me, to produce this course that became the best-selling digital marketing course of all time on udemy.com, and has now been taken more than 325,000 times from people in 195 countries around the world. Isaac didn't know about udemy.com when he produced that course. He thought he was going to charge like $400 for whatever. Like, he had this idea in mind about what it was going to look like, and he set out to do it, and it ended up being successful in something he like didn't even know existed. He couldn't like predict that strategy ahead of time, right? It sort of just like he did a really great thing, and then there was this like really great ripple effect that took afterwards, and it basically propelled our entire business for a very long time. The same thing with like me writing my first book. That, by the way, it started as a blog post. But before it was a blog post, it was an angry email that I was going to send to a client about they were. So now this is like, I guess going back in time, like we became very pro AI in 2017, 2018. At some point in 2018, I had a client that was like adamantly like against us using, it was Smart Shopping was a campaign type that has now been replaced by Performance Max and Google Ads. And she was like, you cannot do that. I will not allow you to use this in our Google Ads campaigns. And I was like, this is the dumbest mentality I've ever seen. And I was going to write an email to like her boss saying like, this whole relationship is going to fail if you don't like tell her to stop. And then I realized like, this is not going to get anywhere. Like, I can't send this email. I like saved it and like went to bed that night. And I woke up, I took all that content, I put it in a blog post, and I titled it as Join or Die, It's Time to Embrace Google Automation. That blog post somehow got discovered by somebody at Google, who sent me a LinkedIn message one day in December of 2018 saying, dude, I read your Join or Die article. I loved it. I'd love for you to come in for us to chat more. I thought it was a spam message. I took this meeting. And then a couple months later, I'm being flown around the world to talk about Google automation. So like, I had no idea, like literally when I wrote that email, when I wrote that blog post, and when I eventually wrote that book, I had no idea what would come of it. But that's quintessential idiotic optimism. It's just like, I think that this could have some good value and utility in the world, even though I can't really like articulate all of that yet. So Isaac's course, my book, some of the key hires we've made over the years, some of the decisions to work with clients that we thought were going to be a complete failure, but we rolled the dice on it anyway because it just felt right. That's what being an idiotic optimism, being an idiotic optimist is. And generally, when you lean into that over time, and good things tend to happen. And then there's actually a quote that I only heard recently. Maybe this could be taken negatively, but it's pessimists are often right, but optimists are often rich.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And it's just like it's an unbelievable, like it is true, right? And I feel that way about how AI is now, right? There are so many people that want to tell you about how it's bad, how it's this, how it's that, how it's not good, whatever. And those pessimists might be totally correct. But guess what? Let's talk in 10 years, right? Let's if you take a pessimist and take an optimist about AI technology right now and talk to both of those people in 10 years and see where they're at. And I think that the answer will be very clear by that point. So that's my concept on core values.
Yeah. So on the pessimist stuff, what we do when we build strategies is we kick pessimists out of the room for the first part, right? So what we're doing is when we build a strategy, we help figure out like, okay, what direction we're going in, who's the customer / how do we win with that customer, right? What market do we play and how do we win that market? And the reason we kick pessimists out is because the way you get to a good idea is through quantity, not quality, right? You find quality through quantity. And so when you come up with the intersection of um, what market do we play in and how do we win in that market, if you come up with 100 ideas, 97 of them will be horrible. But the one that just rips is because you came up with a variation of bad idea number 63. And so what we do is during the ideation process, if we know someone's just a pessimist who shuts stuff down, like they're not invited. But once we've come up with the positioning, then we bring the pessimists into the room and we let them like run the show and say, what's every reason this thing's going to fail? So we can idiot proof it, right? Then we go, okay, now let's do it. And so the combination of pulling pessimists in later can be helpful, but definitely not during the initial part.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. But what I think is super interesting about idiotic optimism, and it sounds like a few of your other values as well, is do you think that if you weren't that specific, if it just said be an optimist, right? Would you be able to rely on values as much as you do? Like you would probably need, I imagine, would you need more systems or more SOPs than the amount of chaos that you're allowed to reign in your business?
So are you saying that the calling it idiotic optimism is what actually makes it good?
Yes, because idiotic optimism, I think, is a strategic choice, whereas optimism, I think, is a best practice. Now, you can argue that you only have 4 choices of values, choosing that one, fair. But the opposite of optimism is pessimism. That's stupid to have as a value, so it's not a strategic choice. But the opposite of idiotic optimism is whatever, smart optimism, right? or like informed optimism, right? Well, if you're deciding between idiotic optimism and informed optimism, that's a great strategic choice because both are great options and both make great companies. And so the fact that you like went that hard on your values and you track people who do idiotic optimism, not informed optimism, means that you have pretty aligned people working your business, which also means that they make decisions way better than other companies who would need to then rely on SOPs.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered the question. All right, I've never thought of it this way. No, I really do. I think it's really good because I can't think of anything specific, but when you frame it as like strategic optimism could run you out of business. Where if you're like I'm using the data and like I can remember a time where like I was going through our own financial data and I was like modeling stuff out for the future. And I was like this makes it seem as if things are just going to keep getting better and better and better. But like I mentioned, like we had like consistent year-over-year growth for many years. And then you kind of look at that and say, no, this isn't going to happen. Like, and if I just sit back and rest on my laurels and say like, oh, we'll just keep doubling in size every year. Like, let's just keep doing what we're doing. That is kind of strategic optimism where it's like, you're sort of like blind to external forces that can actually throw you off course. Like as an example, like, I don't know, like we probably were over indexed on some of our original content and didn't innovate enough at a certain time to like really keep chasing the next thing. If you sit there in strategic optimism and you model yourself into oblivion, you're not going to like be aware of all the other things that could potentially go wrong. So strategic optimism could actually be a huge flaw. But idiotic optimism has like a sense of like, I'm kind of up for some chaos. Like I sort of like, I'm optimism. You know what it is? Like I'm an optimist, but I'm also incredibly anxious, right? Like I'm so uncomfortable. And like if you're just like a strategic optimist, we're like, no, everything's gonna work out. Like look at what the data says. Like you're probably way too comfortable in your business. So I think like that concept of like I'm always looking over my shoulder, I'm always like way too uncomfortable. And maybe that is idiotic too, because it's like, no, you're fine. Like it's okay, things are going okay. But no, I think that that's something that like is a benefit to our business.
Yeah, and I think if I if said a different way, or like the way I think about what we said, is I think both are awesome, right? Informed or strategic optimism, what do you want to call it? I think it's good if you're actually good at like if you're actually challenging your strategy in a good way. So for example, like when we did our models, we would do best case, worst case, likely case. That's what we did for everything. And worst case is we bring in the pessimists in the room and go, no, you messed up this. These are all the bad reasons going to happen, right? And then you list the risks and then mitigate all the risks, right? Risk and mitigant, we would put that in the table. And mitigant's a weird word for people in the niche. It's mitigant is what do you do if this risk were to happen, right? You weight all the risks by impact and then write out what you do if this risk were to happen. And so that would be like informed optimism, which is like, okay, I came up with best case, worst case, likely case. I think through all the downsides, think about what I would do in those downsides, and this still makes sense. Great, let's rock, right? But I think what's interesting about idiotic optimism on the other side is you guys take bigger risks, right? Because you're like, I don't see how this is going to work out. Let's rock. And I think when you do that, because the one thing that strategic optimism doesn't cover, or informed optimism, whatever you want to call it, is what Nassim Taleb calls black swan events, right? Which is, yeah, everything you can model out, sure, you can model it out, but there's some events, triggers, whatever, that aren't in the model. And if those were to happen, it's either going to 100x your business or tank it. And I think idiotic optimism takes advantage of the 100x your business opportunities that informed optimism does not.
I agree, but I'll make one clarification.
Yeah,
I wouldn't call it a risk. Now, like somebody with some sort of job title would call this a risk, but like to me, there was no financial commitment for me writing my book, aside from like the cost that it took to publish it when I did. But I wasn't making a huge investment in it, right? Like I wasn't like taking that big of a risk in the way that you would for like a traditional business sense. And the same thing really goes for Isaac's course, his original course that he did himself. Now you could say, okay, well, there's opportunity cost there, and like he could have been investing his time and cultivating different relationships and spending more time working at the agency, whatever. But I think that the difference there that allowed these types of idiotic optimist projects to work out is that it was kind of a side project, right? Like, and I forget what Google calls it, right? But they have the 20% rule,
Yeah.
whereas like 20% of your time should be spent on like whatever the hell it is you want to. And like Gmail spun out of that, and Google Maps spun out of that, and like all these amazing that like the transistor, which is literally what fueled the LLM explosion, like I think spun out of that. I'm just kind of assuming, but the ability to sort of just like play around and invent stuff and be like, no, like this is kind of something I'm working on the side that like might not have any value for 6 months, a year, 3 years from now, but like I'm passionate about it. I'm really curious. It really has my interest. That those are the things that pay off substantially over time, right? Like what we're doing now with AI tools, I think that we're really ahead of the curve. And it stemmed from about a year ago, some of us playing around with some vibe coding stuff and being like, this is interesting. And like starting to build some tools that had zero utility. The first vibe coding, this is going to make you laugh. The first vibe coding tool I ever made was an app to help my friends and I schedule our fantasy football draft. And I spent no less than 100 hours working on this thing. It's still live. I think it's still live. ScheduleBuddy.co. I built this using Cursor in June of last year, in 2025, right? And it was a long time of me learning about this stuff before I was able to do it. But like, I'm the commissioner of my friend's fantasy football league, and I have like a friend that lives in Europe. I have friends that are like, they have crazy schedules, kids. My brother's a cop. It's like everyone's like schedule is like all over the place. So finding a time for us to do our fantasy football draft is always like my least favorite chore of the entire year. So I literally built like an AI powered scheduling agent that was going to like help us find time to do it. It took me so much time to build this app, like so much time. It had zero utility for adventure media. right? Like, what a complete waste of time. But like, okay, well, I'm an idiotic optimist. Like, I feel like I'm going to learn something about this project. And like, yeah, I
Yeah.
did learn a lot. I learned a lot about creating GitHub accounts and creating like local environment files and getting different API accesses set up. Like, I learned a lot about Google Cloud Console projects that now all of a sudden, when it's September, a few months later, and Adventure Media wants to build an internal operating system so that our employees can manage all their client workload and reporting and insights all from one dashboard. I kind of know a little bit of how that works, right? Like and we shipped a product called Sherpa about a month ago that we're now running all of our client accounts through. And it's our own internal operating system that is like significantly improved, like the way that we operate as a business. And I promise you that that product would not exist if this stupid schedule buddy thing didn't exist. And that is what idiotic optimism is, even though like there was zero risk that really went into that.
Yeah, and I like, because said a different way, idiotic optimism is try things, innovate, and like come up with new ideas, give it a shot, right?
It ties into another core value of ours, which is curiosity. Follow your curiosity, and then good things will eventually happen.
And when you tie that stuff together, that's a unique person. And that unique person fits in well in adventure media. That means when you're that targeted, you don't have to rely as much on follow these strict rules, instructions, right? And so is that kind of innovation time, right? That idiotic optimism time, is that kind of what makes you so interested in being so cutting edge, adopting AI in this sense, and kind of what led you to your book? Your new book, that is.
So, yes. Well, it didn't, yeah. My answer is like it's complicated. I wrote my first book, I published it in 2020, and between the time it took me to finish writing the manuscript and when it actually published, I had already mentally committed to writing another book. And it was there was a study that was released by Google that year, titled "Decoding Decisions: How to Make Sense of the Messy Middle." It was basically it was the most expensive study that Google had ever run up to that point. I'm sure now that's been supplanted, but they introduced a new working model for the marketing funnel. And they had this amazing study and data that went behind like how consumers make decisions in a world where you have unlimited access to choice and information. And so when you frame it as like the traditional marketing funnel was linear, you had awareness, consideration, conversion. And each of those things happened in a silo. You would consume awareness ads on your couch in your living room. You'd see TV commercials, or you're driving in your car, right? You hear it on the radio. And when you saw that commercial for Dove soap, you could not physically buy it. You literally could not buy it in that moment. You'd have to turn off Seinfeld, get in the car, and go and drive to the store and buy it. And now, by the time you're actually in store, you were at the mercy of whatever you were staring at. So again, you could go in the car and drive to another store, but you couldn't look at reviews. You couldn't see product photos. You couldn't like learn about like all the different things you were looking at. You were stuck to make the decision in the store. And so what Google did with that study was try and create a visual description of like how do consumers actually make choices now. And I found this to be so fascinating. And I was like, damn it, I'm going to be writing another book about this. So I knew I committed in my mind. I was like, I'm going to be writing another book and it's going to be more about traditional marketing as opposed to what had been my previous project, which was like how to use AI tactically to execute digital advertising strategies in like Google and Meta. That was like my first book. It was very like playbook. This is how you should do it. And then my next book was going to be more about marketing as a concept. And so I spent a couple of years like really studying the concept of marketing effectiveness and discovering people like Byron Sharp and Les Binet and Peter Field and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute and looking at all the data and research about how consumers actually make decisions and how marketing really influences and grows brands. And so that became my next fascination. And then you layered on the AI wave that happened after it. So that was sort of the progression of what has been a 5-year project into my next book, which is the antithesis of my first book in a lot of ways. But that's sort of how it was sort of a long evolution. But yeah, to your point of like, how like did the core values get me there? And it was the curiosity. It was like, it was sort of thinking about, what if everything that I know about marketing today is incorrect? And I stumbled upon some really interesting resources, and I had a few very lucky conversations along the way that helped me realize that I didn't know anything. And I think that was really humbling, and that's what I've been trying to figure out for the last 5 years now.
You got me hooked. So, uh, so your new book is the opposite of your old book, it sounds like. In what way? Give me a controversial take that exists today that didn't exist back then.
So what is not the opposite is the benefits that AI technology can have for a business. That was kind of the thesis of the first book. But the first book is a playbook for how to run campaigns using AI. And the ironic thing that happened is I published this book in 2020, and then I spent 5 years explaining to clients when they should not be using automation. And I would have conversations with clients like, wait, in chapter 4, you said this. I'm like, yeah, but like, that's not like not every time, right? Like, just because something is a best practice, or just because like this is how it should work theoretically, doesn't mean that that's actually not how it's going to play out. And like, if you're a business at the time, like, a lot of like, you don't have proper conversion tracking set up, and you don't have like only 1 in 20 leads is like actually worth it to you, then just leaning into automation and letting it like optimize with this bad information is actually not good for your brand, or like whatever. So like it was this very weird thing where all of a sudden it's like, it's 2022 and I have clients calling me out saying like, well, you said that automation is better and a consolidated account structure is better, and like liquidity in the auction and premium auctions, and we should be paying more per click. And now you're saying all the opposite. And I'm like, yeah. And the concept that I came back to again and again was never always, never, never. And that's the title of my new book. Never always, never, never. And I'll give you a specific example, or this is how I think about it. I grew up in this industry at a time where best practices ruled everything. There was a right way to do marketing and there was a wrong way to do marketing. And when it comes to running Google Ads campaigns, there was a right way to set up an account and a wrong way. And someone could audit your account and tell the business owner all the things that the current person was doing wrong without knowing anything about the business. They would just say they're not following best practices, and then that agency would get fired, and then the new person would get hired.
Yeah.
That was the industry I had worked in for basically my entire career up until recently. And now, well, and that's very much like blackjack. This is the comparison I make. Because blackjack, you play by the book. Are you a blackjack fan? Have you?
I'm not, bro. I should, but hopefully I can follow your analogy.
So if you're, or if maybe you've seen the movie 21, whatever, like there's kind of a way to play blackjack where if you play it by the book, you can reduce the edge of the house to a very, very small margin. So most people play by the book. And there's like room to optimize on the edges, like whether or not you hit on a soft 17. There's like certain things that you would change, but by and large, everyone plays by the book. Poker is not that. Poker is very much game theory. You could have the best hand in poker, but you could still screw it up. You could have the worst hand in poker and you can still win a big pot. That's the difference in what has happened in the marketing industry. We've transitioned from an industry that relied on playing by the book, like blackjack, to where game theory and strategy matters a lot more, like in poker. And that's why the concept of never always, never, never is very, very important. Because if you just subscribe to this idea that I should be automating everything and running by a best practice, 1, you're going to fail. But 2, you don't need a marketing agency and you don't need a marketing team. Because if there's a correct way to do things in a linear sequence and function, you don't need someone like me to make decisions on your behalf. An LLM can do that. But in a world where never always, never, never holds true, then someone like me is actually really valuable. Because I need to be able to understand the nuance of your business, and I need to understand the nuance of the strategy and the competitive market and all these other variables at play, and then make a decision when all the data isn't even there. And that's why marketers are still going to be valuable in the AI era.
Interesting. So let me play it back. Tell me if I'm misheard you or I'm crazy. So another way of saying never always, never, never is nuance matters. It depends on the context, right? And the reason that wasn't true. In the past, that wasn't true. In the past, there was a best practice. And I think I mentioned this before, but just to clarify the difference between a best practice and a strategic choice, a best practice is there's one good way of doing something, right? A strategic choice is there's multiple ways of doing something. It just depends on what's important to your goals. But in the past, in the digital marketing space, it didn't really matter what your goals were. There was just a good way to do SEO. It was a good way to do Google ads, etc. You could just plug and play for everything. What is it about the digital marketing industry that's changed so that there isn't a one good way of doing things anymore? Like why is that different today than it was before?
So you're familiar with the concept of red ocean and blue ocean, I think.
Yeah, but let's explain it for folks.
So there's a great book written about this, and a red ocean is a marketplace that is already predefined, and there is like a set of rules in place, and there's general understanding about pricing structure and product market fit and all the other variables about like what is expected in this, and it's very competitive. And how to win in a red ocean is you basically have to outmaneuver your competitors that exist in that same space. A blue ocean is something that's like not really defined yet, and there might not be product market fit, but it's very much the Wild West. And I'm sure like you could probably add some context to that, right? Like I feel like you know this a lot better than I do.
And so the where it comes from is it's about competition, right? And BCG, some partners from BCG wrote the book. On my honest opinion, I think the book could have been an email. But the concept is amazing, and it's basically the ocean is red because there's a lot of competition, and in this case, there's a lot of sharks, and sharks are eating the fish, and there's just blood in the water, right? That's what makes the ocean red. The ocean is blue because there's no sharks and there's no people like eating into it. The challenge with the difference between a red ocean and a blue ocean, in that when there's a lot of competition, that also means there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of people there, and so like in a blue ocean, when there's not a lot of competition, you have to teach people why it's important. And so finding product market fit is the challenge. And so in a red ocean, the challenge is marketing. You have the same product. There's a lot of people fighting for it, but can you get in front of people? That's the challenge. In a blue ocean, it's less about marketing and more education, right? Can you educate the people why they need this? And can you find the right positioning or the right combination of like finding the right avatar, creating the solution for their problem that makes it really take off, and that eventually, if there's enough demand there, that'll become a red ocean over time.
Yeah. And so in, between 2013 and 2018, digital advertising was very much blue ocean. The rules weren't fully defined yet. And so like, you could cold call businesses and say, hey, I can get your ads on Google. I'd be like, wow, tell me more. Like, it's actually easier than you think, whatever. And it's like, you were sort of able to just go out there and clear that path. But then over time, like some rules got put in place. But with that, there's this other variable here about like, it's not just competition, it was cost structure. And so there's this famous slide by Mary Meeker, who worked for venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins, in 2011, and she shows the distribution of advertising investment relative to time spent on different media and platforms. And so what that slide shows, if you want to Google it, it's the Mary Meeker slide from 2011. You'll see that advertising was over-indexed in traditional mediums like print and TV, where they were disproportionately spending dollars in areas where there wasn't as much relative time being spent there. But as you looked at digital and mobile specifically, there was a huge gap where advertisers were not spending a lot of money, but consumers were spending a lot of their time. And so that delta created I think it was a $20 billion opportunity in arbitrage. So Mary Meeker was going to her basically investors and the venture capitalists saying, we need to invest in mobile and digital because the cost is like basically nothing right now. Like it's basically free to advertise on these platforms. Like this is where the money is going to be. And that was 2011. That was 15 years ago. And so you had this surge of digital advertising that took place that like this is basically when I entered the industry. And so everything that I had learned from the moment I graduated college up until the beginning of the COVID pandemic was, oh, well, this is the best way to do it, best practice, blue ocean type stuff. Not that we were thinking of it as a blue ocean, but that's what, that's kind of what was happening there. And what I didn't realize until after all this kind of got shook up eventually was that all we were really doing was buying arbitrage traffic. I was not marketing. None of us were marketers. We were running growth hacks to squeeze a market efficiency, which is what arbitrage is. And like any arbitrage market, the market eventually corrects itself for a number of reasons. So two things were happening simultaneously. That arbitrage moment disappeared and the ocean turned red. So there was a time, and honestly, no, not even a time. I've had dozens of conversations with clients who think that they hired us for something that is not in our scope of work. Like as an example, like, I don't know, I remember a very specific conversation with a medical practice a couple years ago. And we're, 3 months into the relationship. He's like, and where are our landing pages? And I'm like, what landing pages? He's like, well, you're a digital agency. You make landing pages. I'm like, no, we don't. He's like, what do you mean? This is what people like you do. That is a red ocean, like so clearly defined. Like you have a specific cost structure in mind. You have an idea about the specific things that the agency should be doing, even though the actual contract that you signed doesn't mention anything about landing pages. That is as clear of a red ocean as you could possibly describe. So we had this thing where all of a sudden we're operating in a red ocean. It doesn't matter how good of an agency we are, how smart we are, how talented we are, what our reputation is. As long as you live in that world, it's really, really hard to grow because people have their mind made up about you before they ever talk to you. Now you compound that with the fact that this ocean was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It was becoming a pond because of AI and because of people cutting their marketing budgets because the economy changed and interest rates went up, and because people were building teams internally, and because of all these other factors that were at play. All of a sudden, this world in which I grew up in and I sort of defined my entire career on was no longer actually a way to hold a career. And so that's been the transformational, or that's been the thing that I've been trying to navigate as the CEO of this company, is saying like, not only are we operating in a red ocean, but it's getting really small, and the arbitrage methods that we sort of grew up on no longer even work. What is the answer there? Strategy. Building real strategy for the first time ever. Now the problem is all of my clients and prospective clients are also marketers who are probably about the same age as I am. So they've only really worked in marketing at a time where they've operated in this red ocean where the whole game on digital was arbitraging traffic. So I am waiting for and betting on the industry to finally wake up to the idea that traditional marketing strategy is actually how you build a sustainable business. And that's what we are transforming ourselves around, that concept of doing real marketing for businesses that haven't really been able to do it before, and using tools like AI and whatever to do so in a cost-effective way.
Interesting. Let me play that back. So it sounds like the three main drivers for why everything's shifted to the point where traditional tactics are dead is, one, the arbitrage disappeared. And the reason that the arbitrage disappears is because that a ton of people have created agencies, and a lot of people are spending on these channels where they didn't spend before. And so costs have gone up. The costs to acquire have gone up on digital platforms.
There are, I don't know if millions is the word, but there are certainly hundreds of thousands of businesses that exist today solely because meta advertising is a thing. And 10 years ago, when I was like, think of all the Shopify stores that would not have been invented if meta advertising didn't exist. Tons. And 10 years ago, like, that was why it was so much more cost effective, because now all of a sudden it's a competition factor. So like, yeah, like that, there was arbitrage in the market, and all these people said, oh, I can drop ship. I could build I could, whatever. I could find an audience and exploit it. And that's what drives up all the costs on all these platforms, right? Like people think like, oh, it's like Google is charging you more and Meta is charging you more. No, it's because there's more people that realize that it's basically free to buy customers from these platforms. That's why the cost has gone up. It shouldn't be that easy. That's really why the cost has gone up. So yeah, that has certainly played into it, right? The jig is up, the window is shut, whatever the analogy you want to make.
Yeah. So before, when you looked, so before, people weren't spending on social platforms. Now, a ton of spend, right? And then historically, the amount that people spend made up of two parts, let's call it. One was the actual ad spend itself, the cost to get eyeballs, and the other was on infrastructure, where you paid an agency to get the skills, etc. The amount that people are spending on the infrastructure or the agency is going down, right? So cost to get those same eyeballs going up, and then the spend on the infrastructure is going down because of AI. Got it. That's awesome. And so the argument now is that industry is maturing. The advantage that we had before is disappearing. And because that's maturing, we as agency owners have to mature. And we can no longer just give our clients best practices and tactics. We have to give them more strategic advice. Got it. Now, what is the strategic advice?
So I would argue that most businesses don't actually have a strategy. And this word gets thrown around so much. And by the way, every strategy book that you read, I have like 100 of them sitting on my desk, right?
That's my favorite
book
one.
on strategy. Oh, you like good strategy, bad strategy?
It's awesome,
It's really interesting. Every one, the first chapter is about how too many people use the word strategy to describe everything, right? How it doesn't really mean anything anymore. Do you have something to add on that?
Yes. There's a so every person defines strategy differently. There's actually a whole book called Strategy Safari. I think it's like 300 and something pages, 13 chapters, and each chapter is devoted to a different definition of strategy, right? And so when we say the word strategy, nobody agrees or knows what it is. I think my most viral posts are just saying a plan is not a strategy, because everyone thinks planning is strategy, right? It's not true. When we did our projects, we would do a strategy project, then a planning project, then an execution project, and that was the life cycle. So I'll stop ranting. How would you explain what strategy is? What is it to you? And we can debate it.
So the simple way of thinking about it is, or most people think like, oh, I'm in point A, I want to go to point B. The thing is, like, you're going to get somewhere by showing up to work every day, right? Like, all of us are very busy and we're all overwhelmed and we all have a bunch of stuff on our plate. So like, most of us go to work every single day and we have like a list of tasks, and then things come up and fires to put out and whatever. So we're all operating businesses and making some degree of revenue, whatever. So you're going to get somewhere regardless. To me, you think about like, where are you going to end up if you keep doing the things that you're currently doing, right? What does point B look like? And then think about what point C looks like. And point C is like where you actually want to end up. And that delta is where strategy lives. And that's not exactly the definition of strategy, but like, that's where the strategy lives, is trying to figure out like, where will I probably be a year from now? And then where do I want to be from a year from now? And what are the things I need to do differently to get there? And so there's a concept called the Red Queen effect that comes from Alice in Wonderland. And at some point, I've never even seen Alice in Wonderland, but like at some point, Alice encounters the Red Queen, who is running in place. And she's yelling at Alice to run as fast as she possibly can and stay in place. And Alice is confused, and she's like, "What? Why? Like, shouldn't we be going somewhere? I don't want to stay in place. I want to go forward. I want to go here." And the Queen says to her, "No, you have to run as fast as you can to stay in the same place. If you want to go forward, you have to run even twice as fast." And it's an amazing analogy for business, because we're all running as fast as we can, but we're not really getting anywhere because we're all very busy. If you want to actually get somewhere, you want to get ahead, you got to run twice as fast. You have to innovate, you have to do something different, whatever. And I think that's something that I think about a lot, is like the difference between just operating as you are and implementing strategy that will help change the trajectory of where you're headed. So what we come in and say is like, okay, well, where are you projected to go a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, based on all the data that we have on your business? And then where do you want to be? And then let's have a conversation about what's going to help you get there. Because then you start to have a conversation about budget and risk profile, right? If someone's in a shrinking business, right? Because also like category demand matters, right? So if someone's in, let's try and think of like a shrinking category.
Shrinking category, SaaS. No, I mean, it depends how you do it. What's a shrinking
Phone repair.
category?
Let's talk about let's
Sure.
talk about like tech repair, phone repair, right? And I know this business very well. People really don't break their iPhones anymore because they're really, really strong. Most people, it's very cheap to get really high quality cases. But a couple years ago, phone repair was a very booming business, and so a lot of companies really invested in this. So if you operate a chain of phone repair stores, you're in a shrinking category. But if you're like, well, I want to triple my revenue next year, it's like, okay, it's not impossible. But if you realistically want to get there and you look at the numbers, you're going to need to take a couple big swings and you're going to have a lot of risk appetite. Like you're going to have to make a big investment that might actually not play out. Is that something you're prepared to take? And if the answer is no, then we need to have a more reasonable conversation about what your goals are so that we can adjust the strategy accordingly. And this is an honest conversation that not enough marketing teams are having with the leadership because realistically, like by the time a lot of marketing agencies get hired, all those conversations have been placed and they're like, okay, our budget is, $100,000 a month and we need to get a 3 times return on ad spend. And we want to run, ads on these 3 platforms, go do it. And so your marketing agency, instead of being strategists, they become execution button pushers who don't really have the ability to add any marginal utility to your business, so you're wasting your money to begin with. Where we come in is we say, well, we really want to come in before all those conversations take place so that we can then have an honest conversation about all the different things that need to be done in the organization if we have any chance of actually hitting that goal. And that's what strategy is to us.
Interesting. What would you, okay, let's use the example. I'm more familiar with, like you said, marketing agencies is a shrinking TAM right now, right? The ocean is shrinking. Let's talk about that as an example. So the way I would think about the components of strategy, we have 3. One is the goal, the vision, where you're going. And I think most people poo-poo that, and it's wildly important, and I want to talk about that. Another component of strategy for me is positioning. Who's the customer? Like, who's the avatar? And how do you win with that avatar? And then the third component of that bleeds into execution a little bit. So this is why I'll tell you what the framework we use is, but in practice we don't use this part as much because there's a lot of bleed over into execution. Where it's what are the capabilities you need to build by to make that choice happen. And the reason we do this sorry, let me finish it. What are the capabilities you need to build or buy to make that happen? And then lastly, how do you need to change your management systems to make it happen, right? Performance and that kind of stuff. Now, what we do to make sure it doesn't bleed in execution, because capabilities like buying a company bleeds into the plan, the execute part, is we only talk about non-best practices. So as an example, if it's a best practice to have performance evals once a quarter, that's not going to be in the strategy deck. That's going to be in the planning deck or the execution deck. But if there's specific trainings that we have to have that are not a best practice, that are unique to the strategy we just built, then we add that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so when we figure out or agree upon the strategic pillars we should operate around, those should remain unchanged. Some sort of black swan event would have to change your mind about whether or not that's a good idea, right? You should all be able to agree that this is the right direction. And then underneath that are a bunch of tactical things that most of them will fail, and that's okay. And so, to go with your concept of like the reviews, right? Why as an organization would you implement quarterly performance reviews? Well, if your strategic initiative is something around higher output per employee, right? Per whatever, right? You're trying to carry more revenue per employee. And so you're like, okay, well, what are all the different ways in which we can do this, right? And you have a brainstorming session with post-it notes, and you say, what are all the different things that we can do to be able to have our employees generate more output for our organization? And one of them might be like, well, if we give them more feedback, more direction, then maybe they'll be more productive. Okay, that's a good, interesting hypothesis. Let's dig deeper. What are some of the ways in which we can give more feedback? Okay, maybe quarterly reviews. And then you might realize, like 6 months down the road, a year down the road, that the quarterly reviews aren't actually rolling up to your intended goal. And that's when you could say, okay, let's throw out the quarterly reviews. Let's do something else. But it doesn't change the larger, like, strategic, like a strategic initiative of we want to be able to increase our average output per employee. That's a good initiative, right? Like every business could probably benefit from that. And if you're saying like this is what we're going to sort of plant our flag on, and we're gonna do a bunch of different things relentlessly to figure out how to do that, then realistically, your idea of like the quarterly reviews might fail. And you have to be okay with that failing and not just say, well, we do this because it's commonplace in our industry to do quarterly reviews. Like to me, that's the difference between strategy and tactics.
Yes. Whether that's a tough one. But yeah. So what it sounds like is whether it's a best practice or it's like initiatives that you can try, like non-best practices. That's the difference between strategy and tactics for you?
Yes. Also, by the way, like a lot of tactics might not have a very clear line back to like real business outcomes. Like to me, if something can't like really be tied back to how does this directly impact revenue or profit, then like it's probably not that strategic. And so like you can't really like if I were to say, why are you doing quarterly performance reviews? How does that impact company profitability? And then if the answer to that has to like if it's multiple sentences, then it's probably not a strategic initiative.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I think at the level we're talking about right now makes total sense. I'm on it. Um, the difference between strategy and tactics starts to break down a little bit the more you drill down to the business. And so like I struggle to use the terminology. The reason I say it is because you come up with a strategy, you make the tactics, which are one level down, and then those tactics are strategic initiatives for the people below you. And so your tactics are someone else's strategy.
Yes.
And so that starts to break my brain a little bit as you drilled into the organization. But other than that, yes, I agreed. And so how do you decide what initiative is for you? How do you decide what a strategic initiative is?
So there's also a difference between like running the business and like our business, or maybe your listeners' businesses, and then like a marketing strategy. Because that's again like where we're throwing around the same word to describe different things here. So which path do you want to take?
Tell me the difference between a business strategy and a marketing strategy.
So you're talking about different levels, different components, and different things that can be done. A business has three main components. You have finance, you have sales and marketing, and then you have operations. So when you talk about a larger business strategy, and you're still having the same conversation, like where are we trying to get to, right? You can break things down. There's a lot of different levers that you might pull and a lot of strategic initiatives that you would have across the board. And you might have some of those functions or you might have a strategic pillar that involves one or more of those three functions, right? Something that like ties sales and marketing back to operations or finance component into it. Like the finance will influence the budget, whatever. A marketing specific initiative or strategy is just looking directly at like what kind of influences marketing and should really think about new customer acquisition and like just revenue growth. Marketing is the only function in the organization that actually drives revenue. So everything should tie back to some sort of revenue outcome, as opposed to like other like business initiatives might have to do with like cost saving or whatever. Marketing should really be focused on driving revenue and new customer acquisition. And the way you get there, a lot more of marketing strategy it's simpler because a lot of it really comes down to identifying your target audience, then identifying your creative strategy, and then working backwards into a media plan, and then executing on that media plan. It's much simpler to actually put those pieces in place because there's actually fewer variables to pull on, as opposed to when you're dealing with a business strategy, there's like a lot of more complexity to it.
Got it. Okay. And so I would say we use the same framework for a business strategy versus a marketing strategy. And then I would take those details and put it into a marketing plan. And I differentiate between a marketing strategy and marketing plan. And so as an example, we choose is a framework called the Choice Cascade, which is our strategic framework. It's what I mentioned before, the goal, the positioning, and the execution side. Um, and so we have that at the business level, and then we have one cascade for each function. And the reason we do that is because they all have to tie back to the corporate or the bigger business strategy. Otherwise, there's holes and gaps and the whole thing falls apart. And so that's why we actually make a strategy for each function and tie it all back together. And then once we have that strategy, so in the marketing side, for example, it would be like, we're going to target this person in these geographies with these products and services, and here's how we're going to win, right? Here's the channels we're going to use to reach them. Then we take that information from the strategy and we put it into the plan. And the marketing plan is a separate animal. That's with the more of the details on how we execute.
Yeah. I'll give you the never always never never take on that, is that in the wrong hands, that framework can be way too nuanced and segmented, and then get expensive and then really limit your ceiling. Because if you then say, okay, well, who's our target audience? And people like to have a lot of fun with the concept of buyer persona and say, okay, well, our target audience is, like remote worker Rachel, and she like is 25 years old and she has a freelancing job and she like whatever. And we like to get really like cute about like who our products and services are for, not recognizing that like most brands grow because they target and acquire light buyers who don't actually look a lot like one another. And so when you get too focused and nuanced as like your target audience, and you then fold that into your marketing targeting, like you're basically saying like, I'm only going to go on Google and buy these keywords, and I'm only going to go on Meta and buy these audiences, and you make yourself restricted to mass marketing type upper funnel advertising, you're really going to limit your growth, and you're going to pay significantly more cost per click and CPM than you otherwise would if you took a different approach. So like one of the aspects of strategy that is for marketing strategy is looking at all the different avenues of the funnel and recognizing that website traffic like really matters. And again, like we moved away from this because I think we've gotten, as an industry, we've gotten obsessed with like click-based attribution and conversions and return on ad spend that we've ignored the idea that like if two brands, like all things considered, have wildly different amounts of traffic to their website, like forget about how they got that traffic, the brand with the more traffic is going to win. Now, you could say, well, it depends on the traffic, it depends on their strategy. It actually doesn't, because like once you get that number to be really high, it's going to win, because marketing is a probabilistic game. And like you actually said this earlier when you were talking about optimizing for quantity of outcomes as opposed to quality. Like if you optimize for quantity of outcomes, the quality will follow. And so a lot of marketing right now is built upon averages, where it's like, oh, well, what's my average cost per click? What's my average conversion rate? What's my average order value? And we don't recognize that every single thing that we do, every KPI that we have in our overly complicated dashboards is actually a negative binomial distribution, where at the very beginning of it, you have a curve that goes like this, and then like the long tail is very, very long, and then our averages actually make no sense at all. And so when we optimize for averages, we get average and we limit our growth. And so that's a really important nuance. So what I mean by this is saying like overall website traffic matters, and part of your strategy should be thinking not just about the highest quality audience, but also the most cost-effective audience. And so this is a big argument in favor of YouTube advertising, which people don't really like because YouTube doesn't show a lot of direct click conversions. And so most brands are ignoring YouTube as a placement and they're putting their video advertising dollars onto platforms like Meta or TikTok. Now, let me tell you a little bit about YouTube advertising, and why people ignore it. When you run click-based attribution modeling and you use a platform like Triple Whale or Northbeam as your like multi-touch attribution platform of choice, it's going to show that YouTube has basically zero utility to your business because not a lot of people are clicking on those ads and buying your products. But guess what? YouTube serves ads on multiple different devices, mobile, desktop. It even serves on YouTube on your TV screen, right? You might have the YouTube app on your smart TV, right? You're going to be surprised when I tell you this. More minutes every single day of YouTube, like youtube.com, are streamed on television devices than mobile devices. The majority of YouTube content today in Q1 of 2026 are consumed on television sets.
No way.
A 65-inch screen in your living room. YouTube ads are TV ads. And the marketing community ignores it because we've bought into this mindset of best practice click-based attribution. And so we can't conceive a world where if someone doesn't click on my ad and go to my website and buy something, we can't conceive that that ad impression would ever be valuable to us. But if you remove yourself from that and take a step back and say, holy shit, I can buy TV ads for like $5 CPM with a really high quality audience? Huh. Would you have done that 10 years ago? Like if you were able to buy ads on a 70-inch screen on your target audience's living room for less than $5 CPM or less than $10 CPM, whatever it is, would you do that? And you would say, yeah, of course I would. Sign me up for that. Spend as much money as possible. But because we live in this world where now like Triple Whale has told us that we can get a definitive golden record source of truth on how every single dollar you invest is generating profit for your bottom line, it's complete snake oil because they're not considering the fact that you can buy TV ads in your customer's living room for pennies on the dollar. And so we all ignore it. And that is why it is so low cost, because no one's doing it. Who's not doing it? Who's not listening to that? And who is buying YouTube ads? My clients. Because I've told them that they have to. Because they absolutely have to. You know, like if you want to buy CTV ads on like Peacock or Netflix or HBO, whatever, you're looking at like $45 CPMs in a lot of those places. You can get that same TV placement for a tenth of that cost through YouTube. But everyone ignores it. Because everyone's been looking at this through a totally different lens.
But I think what I like the most about what you said is that it matters whose hands the strategy is in. And I think that what I mean by that is these strategic frameworks are intentionally simple, which means that anyone can use them, which is awesome, but put into the wrong hands, the hands of someone who doesn't know what they're doing, they're not going to come up with a good strategy, even though the framework looks simple. It's and so that kind of gives me a little bit of comfort in that that's the direction that marketing agencies need to go in, which is being able to guide people through that strategic choice in a way that LLMs cannot.
Totally. It's literally, how does an LLM get its knowledge? By ingesting everything in the internet and then giving you the middle of that. What is the middle of that? Average. And so everyone is optimizing for the average. And so if you want to be different, especially in a red ocean, by the way, if you're operating in a red ocean and you want to be able to get a competitive advantage, you cannot rely on an LLM to tell you what the average strategy is. You need to find a way to differentiate yourself. And that's where marketers have value. Okay.
And so if you're a marketing agency, you add value by strategic frameworks and helping people through the strategy, not the tactics. How would you use an LLM in that case? Because I know you are a huge AI nut, and you have a Claude Code workshop coming up. How would you use Claude Code in a strategic way?
So Claude is an LLM, and then Claude Code or Claude Cowork, different tools. Most people are still using an LLM, probably just ChatGPT, as like maybe a better version of Google. And I think what we're trying to do with our Claude Code training that's happening next Tuesday on March 24th, it's a 7-hour training, is to help people understand what AI actually allows you to do. And so to me, this is a a concept I write about in Never Always Never Never, this 4x2 model of work where there are 4 different things that we do as knowledge workers. There are 4 different kinds of work that we do. There is like visionary design. That's number 1. Number 2 is problem solving. Number 3 is decision making. And the 4th is building and executing. So visionary design is blank canvas. I'm gonna design something, right? It might be a new business. It might be a painting. It might be a new ad, right? Blank canvas, visionary design, creatives really go well there, right? Then you have problem solving, which is like, okay, I have the blank canvas, but there's this specific thing that needs to be fixed. I need to have an answer to this question. And problem solving, you have like a kind of a, when you've solved the problem, right? When you've checked that box. Okay, decision making is you have to make a decision. And that's all of analytics is just decision making. It's I have data, I'm trying to take this data and put it in a different way so that I can make an informed decision. And then the last is executing and building. And so the way I think about that is like, let's say you're Starbucks and you're designing let's say you're designing like the next set of holiday drinks, right? Like next year, Christmas time's gonna come around. Like, what's the next version of the sugar cookie latte that Starbucks is gonna put out? Well, someone's gonna have an idea for that. They're gonna have the vision. Then they're gonna solve all the problems related to like, how do I source these materials? Like, how is it gonna compete? Whatever. And then it's decisions about like price point, how to market it, whatever. And then once like the barista gets the order and actually has to like go and like make it, like that's when they're finally building. That's what all of us do all day long. Now, in the old way of thinking, we used to do 3 things. We would either do the work ourselves, we would do it with, we would share the work with a partner, or we would delegate it to somebody else. And in the new way of thinking with AI, you should never do something yourself. You have a co-pilot sitting next to you at all times that can be your partner in designing, that can be your partner in problem solving, that can be your partner in running an analytics program that you've never been capable of doing so that you can make better informed decisions. And then, most importantly, it can do a lot of the physical execution and building work for you. And so that's the way I think about AI in general, is saying it will help you amplify yourself where you never actually have to do any of this work by yourself again. It allows you to do things better, faster, more efficiently, more cheaply, but specifically to do things you've never been capable of doing before. And so Claude by itself, right, as a chat bot, is really good at helping you problem solve, and can help you flesh out some ideas on some of those other categories, right? But it can't really build for you. It can't really like take a vision for you and really go run with it. It can't really do a lot of data analysis for you. It's kind of limited. It's primarily a problem solving tool. Claude Code allows you to do all 4 of those things really well. So it's a really long way of explaining it, but it's sort of this really important mentality where like, I don't think the majority of people fully understand the value that AI can bring to their business, right? We're all thinking about it from the lens of productivity and cost savings. That's only one strand, man. That's like of the 2 strand of the DNA cycle. Like the cost savings is one component of it. The ability to do things that you were not previously capable of doing because you didn't have the skills, you didn't have the resources, you didn't have the know-how, whatever, is completely thrown out the window now because you now have a tool in your hand that you could pay $20 a month for, that allows you to do things that were never previously possible. And so that's what we're very passionate about. That's what we're delivering to a lot of our clients. And that's what we're going to help show people how to do on March 24th with our 7-hour Claude Code workshop.
I couldn't agree more. It's insane. And it's one of those things where for my business, I always told people about how important AI was, and I used it like a chatbot, right? And then I decided to make the switch from Claude Chat to Claude Cowork. And I used to make projects in Claude Chat. Mm-hmm. And then what I realized was in Claude Cowork, it just started kind of learning on its own and just getting better and better at the skills that I wanted it to get good at. And so then I went all in and went extreme and got Claude Code. And so now I have a executive assistant who scans my emails every day, sees who I need to follow up with, I haven't followed up with, who hasn't responded, removes stuff to spam, and checks my calendar and gets me updated on everything I need for the day, right? Um, and that took me an hour to build, you know? Um, what else do I have? I have a strategist who lets me think through the problems that we were just talking to. It just challenges me on my biases, all that kind of stuff. Um, I have a COO, I call the exec COO, who like helps build out skills for other bots, right? Um, and so like all these agents that I can kind of enable to run my business is giving me way more advantage than I had before. Like I think it's awesome. I think people don't understand how important it is.
Are you classically technical? Like, have you ever been trained as a web developer or anything like that? Like, what's your experience with code, with programming? When was the first time you ever had to like work with an API key?
Um, I mean, like I've copy pasted API keys
Yeah,
before, right?
yeah. But like not really knowing. Yeah,
But like not really. I have no technical skill, if
yeah.
that's true. Another way to say this. I have zero technical skill, and
Same.
um I save something to GitHub, right?
Yeah.
And I've always like seen these things, these GitHub references, but I'm a business owner. I care about margins and pricing strategy and go to market, right? Not coding. But now I'm typing in Claude code and it's been the best thing of all time.
I agree. I'm the same way. Look, I've done a little bit of like conversion tracking stuff. I can use the word data layer in a sentence, but like I'm not technical and I've never been, and I'm not the kind of person that and my world has completely changed because of all this stuff. And like co-work, by the way, like blew my mind the first time I really had it, and I had to go fetch data from Google Analytics. I don't know like how much time you spend in GA4, but it's the worst experience ever. And I quickly realized I never have to log into this platform again. And I was like ready to pop open a bottle of champagne because I realized I could just tell Claude Code, like, hey, I want to do an analysis on XYZ, go find that information for me. And even better, there was something I was trying to do for a client. I was trying to do an analysis of their SEO, and I didn't have access to Search Console yet, but I had access to Google Analytics 4. So I went to Claude Code and explained what I was trying to prove or solve for, and said, like, I don't really know if this is possible to be able to get this data from Google Analytics. This is all I have. Like, how would you go about solving this problem? I was like specifically looking at their blog content, and Claude came back to me and was like, here's the kind of report I would look at. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that like was possible. And I was like, cool, go fetch it. And I fetched the data and it did this analysis for me. And I was like, oh my God, like I don't even have access to Search Console. And I just did a full SEO audit using a report I never would have known existed. And it was done for me like while I was watching my daughter that day. It was amazing. And like that was like a huge aha moment for me. But now like I'm working in Claude Code all day. I have different terminals and different like projects for all these different things. I also have like a executive assistant that I only just realized um like yesterday should just be a web app. And I think that's actually really like kind of the big breakthrough with Claude Code in particular, because I think like we've all used different productivity tools and different stuff like this over time, but they're all like kind of rigid in the way that they're built. And eventually, like if something doesn't fit into the way that you like to operate, like you stop using it altogether. Like if you use Notion or if you use like Monday.com, at a certain point, something that you do like won't fit into those buckets. But Claude Code is a constant blank canvas. So if you say like, oh, actually, like I just want to take this like conversation and make it into a web app, or I want to make it into a text chat, or I want to like change it and add this feature, you can just do it. And 5 seconds later, you have that thing built into your like productivity stack. So like it's so amazing the blank canvases that we're working with. And like once you really dive into it, you just like the light bulbs start going off. The thing is, like, I want more people to experience this. And like not enough people are diving in because they're intimidated, they're overwhelmed, they don't know where to start. And that's what we're trying to help with.
Yeah, I think what's scary, and before I had my conversion moment, right? Like, um, I heard people have the conversation we're having right now, right? And I was like, yeah, that sounds really cool. I don't have the time, but it would be amazing, right? And then I look at, and I'll just like watch people on YouTube get into it, right? And I just like to like, that's my, like entrepreneur side where I'll be like, oh, I'd like to get into it eventually, so I'll watch other people do it instead of doing it myself. Um, and then and I'd see them on Claude Code, right? And I'd see them in Cursor with Claude Code inside of Cursor and be like, that's too much for me to learn. That's too much of a
Yeah.
learning curve.
It looks very intimidating.
Looks very intimidating. And then I saw one day Claude added Cowork to the main app. I was like, let me just click the button. Right? So you click the button, and I think Claude Cowork, I think Claude Cowork is the dip your toe in the water of Claude Code. Like you start in Claude Cowork, you do one or two things, you have your conversion moment, go, oh shoot. And what surprised me is then I added Claude Code and I was up and running in 20 minutes. And like that fear of I don't understand code, I don't know how to do this, I'm not technical, was overcome in 20 minutes. Like it was very
Totally.
easy.
I think as a business owner, that theory definitely tracks. I think that the majority of like knowledge workers will probably default and use more Claude Cowork over time. But I think that I think there's a world in which both of those things are very valuable and very useful. But I think like when you have that builder mentality where it's like, oh, I could just like invent my own thing here. Like I don't think everyone has that. But everyone should explore it and see if you have it, because like I found people in my organization that like did not know what they were capable of, 2 months ago, and now they're building stuff that blows the rest of us out of the water. It's incredible.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Um, yeah, it's incredible. And so I know you have the workshop coming up soon. How can folks find you? How can folks find the workshop?
Find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to Patrick Gilbert. Just search for me. So my company is Adventure Media. Our website is adventureppc.com. And you go there, you'll find information about the workshop. I have a book coming out in beginning of May. It's called Never Always Never Never. The website for that, it's not currently listed on Amazon or anything like that, but I have neveralwaysbook.com is my current landing page and website for it. By the way, this is the first book. I should have mentioned this before. This is going to be the first book that I know of that comes along with its own AI agent coach. So if you go to neveralwaysbook.com, there's a chat function where it's trained on all the material from the book. It's trained on my other book as well. And it's trained on a bunch of other stuff that I'm very passionate about and have written about. And so at the end of every single chapter in this book, there's a QR code that will bring you to that agent and say, hey, you just finished a chapter on mental availability. What questions do you have? What do you want to talk about? You want to go through any of the research that we discovered? And you can now use this coach to dig deeper into the concepts that I wrote about in the book. I don't know if anyone's done this before, so this is the first book that's ever been written that comes along with its own AI agent. By the way, I built that agent last weekend. I did it on Claude Code. It was an amazing project, but it's really good. It's like really, really good. I did this whole thing using Claude Code. So yeah, I could do a whole other podcast about like my experience in publishing this book relative to my first book, which was kind of a nightmare. This whole thing, I basically used a lot of Claude to like get this thing like designed and typesetted, and like the whole like production part of it has been like unbelievably. It's been a crazy experience because of Claude Code. So yeah, awesome. It comes with an AI agent. So go to the website, check it out, find me on LinkedIn, and then buy the book when it comes out.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, cool. I'm excited to have an agent plug in my book. So that's great. Well, appreciate it. Thanks for joining. This has been awesome.
Thanks, Brian. Awesome.
Absolutely.